You think African American dinners were just fried chicken and collard greens? Think again. Black families across America filled their supper tables with extraordinary dishes that carried history, resourcefulness, and deep cultural pride before quietly vanishing. Let's dig into 60 African American dinners no one makes anymore. Shepherd's pie with creamed corn was one of those dinners that brought everyone to the table just by existing. Families layered it differently depending on what they had, but the pattern was always roughly the same: a savory meat base, a layer of creamed corn, and a cloud of mashed potatoes spread across the top like a soft, warm blanket. It baked into a bubbling, golden-topped dish that felt like comfort scooped straight from the oven. The creamed corn added sweetness and richness that balanced the meat perfectly, turning each bite into a blend of textures and flavors that tasted far more complicated than it really was. Kids loved digging through the layers. Adults loved how far it could stretch when money was tight, and everyone loved how one pan could feed an entire family without anyone feeling shortchanged. It was a dish shaped by personality, by whatever seasonings happened to be nearby, by the quiet creativity of home cooking. Even now, people crave it because it represents a whole world of warmth, routine, and togetherness tucked beneath a layer of mashed potatoes. Hoppin' John was more than food. It was a wish whispered into every new year and a memory of old fields and family prayers. Made from black-eyed peas, rice, and a scrap of salted pork, it carried a meaning far greater than its humble parts. Each bowl symbolized luck, wealth, and resilience, a quiet hope for better days ahead. Born on plantations where ingredients were scarce, Hoppin' John turned survival into tradition. The peas represented coins, the rice abundance, and the pork, the flavor of prosperity. It became a holiday staple across generations, cooked in cast-iron pots and served with greens on the side. The slow simmer filled homes with comfort, while the taste spoke of endurance. People didn't just eat Hoppin' John, they believed in it. It was a way to honor ancestors who worked the land and still found joy in sharing a simple meal. Every spoonful connected past to present, hardship to hope. In the rhythm of the South, Hoppin' John remains a dish that keeps faith alive, proving that luck can be cooked, shared, and passed down like love itself. Cabbage and sausage pot dinners were beloved because cabbage was cheap, filling, and strong enough to stand up to long cooking. Mothers sliced the cabbage thinly, added onions, potatoes, and just a few coins worth of cured sausage. As it cooked, the sausage flavored the whole pot, giving every bite that smoky richness even though the meat itself was scarce. Sometimes mothers added pepper flakes or vinegar to brighten the pot, and the whole mixture softened into something soothing and hearty. Children felt like they were eating something rich and comforting, even though most of the volume came from vegetables. The pot simmered slowly, filling the kitchen with steam and warmth during cold evenings. Kids felt lucky whenever this meal appeared because it tasted like more than the ingredients suggested. Cabbage and sausage pot dinners were winter survival disguised as comfort food. Macaroni and tomatoes were the taste of thrift wrapped in comfort. Boiled pasta was mixed with stewed tomatoes, butter, and a sprinkle of salt and pepper, coming together into something far greater than the sum of its parts. It was tangy, hearty, and filling enough to satisfy a house full of hungry stomachs on pennies. Sometimes a chopped onion or pinch of sugar was added to soften the acidity, and occasionally a bit of bacon or cheese made its way in when fortune allowed. But the truth was, it didn't need a thing. The sauce clung to every curve of the noodles, and the butter gave it a warmth that felt like home. Families who had little still sat down to bowls of this with pride, passing around plates and smiles as if they were feasting. It was food that proved joy could be simple, that dignity could be delicious. For many, macaroni and tomatoes were more than a meal. They were memory, comfort, and survival served hot. Hot water cornbread with beans was a meal made from ingenuity and routine. When the oven was too expensive to use and flour too hard to find, folks made do on the stovetop. Cornmeal, boiling water, and salt were all it took to fry golden rounds that sizzled crisp around the edges. Served beside a pot of seasoned beans, It became dinner good enough to forget hard times for a little while. It was soft inside, crunchy outside, and perfect for soaking up every drop of bean broth. That combination filled stomachs and lifted spirits, proof that poverty never stood a chance against a skilled cook with a hot pan. The sound of the cornbread frying was like music, sharp, rhythmic, and alive. Children watched as their mothers flipped each piece, timing it by instinct. Sometimes a little sugar was added, sometimes a sprinkle of pepper, but the result was always the same. Simple joy on a plate. Even when cupboards looked bare, a bag of cornmeal could turn a kitchen into a place of plenty. It was survival disguised as comfort, the kind of meal that told the world that love could still taste golden and crisp. Pot roast with carrots and onions was the Sunday ritual that made the whole house smell like home before you even opened your eyes. The roast went into a heavy pot early in the day, searing first before settling into a long simmer with onions, carrots, and maybe a potato or two. Hours passed, the aroma grew richer, and by evening the meat was tender enough to fall apart under the slightest pressure. This was not just a meal, it was a gathering point, a reason for everyone to show up at the table. The vegetables soaked up the broth, turning sweet and soft, and the whole pot felt like comfort poured into a single dish. People still crave it because it tasted like stability, like being cared for, like the end of a long week wrapped neatly in gravy. Cabbage and potatoes with fatback was the kind of dinner that came from both patience and pride. It started with simple ingredients, just a head of cabbage, a few potatoes, and a piece of salted pork. But it ended up tasting like something far grander. The fatback sizzled first in the pan, releasing its smoky aroma that filled the house and made stomachs growl. Then came the cabbage and potatoes, frying and steaming together until tender and glistening. The salty richness from the pork flavored every bite, turning two humble vegetables into a full meal. It was a one-pan supper that needed no extras, no fancy seasoning, just time and care. Families cooked it when payday was still far away, yet it always brought a sense of comfort. This was food that worked hard to remind people they were still home, still together, and still able to make something beautiful from what little they had. Fried fatback with wilted greens was a dinner that stretched almost nothing into something satisfying. Fatback was cheap, salty, and often the only pork a household could afford, but its flavor went a long way. Mothers sliced it into thin pieces and fried them in a hot skillet until the edges curled and turned golden. The rendered fat was then used to cook mustard or collard greens, softening them into a tender, silky pile that tasted deeply seasoned even without meat. Sometimes mothers added a splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar to balance the sharpness of the greens, turning the pot into something even more comforting. The sizzle of the fatback and the sharp smell of the greens mixed together in a way that pulled children toward the kitchen. They waited near the stove, hoping for a crispy piece fresh from the pan, knowing it might be the only meat they tasted that night. A single piece of fatback on the plate felt like a treat, even though it cost almost nothing. The greens wilted perfectly in the hot pan, absorbing every bit of flavor left behind. Mothers served big portions because greens filled the belly and kept everyone satisfied. It was a simple meal, but it fed the whole family. Fried fatback with wilted greens was resourcefulness turned into tradition. Fried bologna steaks were the working family's luxury, served with pride and no apology. Bologna came cheap and lasted long, and when sliced thick and fried in a hot skillet, it became something better than anyone expected. The edges curled and browned as they sizzled, crisping in their own salty fat until the kitchen filled with the smell of smoky comfort. Some families added onions, letting them caramelize right alongside, while others poured milk and flour into the pan to make a rich gravy from the drippings. Served over mashed potatoes or tucked into a sandwich, fried bologna was more than food. It was resourcefulness turned into tradition. Kids loved its crisp edges. Parents loved that it stretched $1 and still filled every belly. For families who worked hard and had little to spare, this meal was both dignity and delight. Every bite was a reminder that care and creativity could turn the simplest things into something worth remembering. Fried bologna wasn't a compromise. It was proof that pride could be pan-fried and served hot, one slice at a time. Ramen noodles with hot sauce and eggs might sound simple, but for many families in the 1970s, it was a miracle in a bowl. A few packs could feed everyone, and all it needed was water, fire, and imagination. The noodles curled in the pot, soaking up every bit of spice and salt, while the eggs dropped in and turned silky. Hot sauce gave it life, that fiery bite that cut through the sameness of struggle. It was quick, cheap, and hot, a meal that tasted like satisfaction. The whole house smelled faintly of pepper and pride. People called it poor folks' comfort food, but it was clever too, proof that creativity beats money any day. When you had nothing but still made something good, you learned to see joy in the smallest things. That bowl was proof that flavor, like hope, could always be stretched. Smothered chicken wings were a budget dinner that turned the cheapest poultry cut into something tender enough to fall off the bone. Wings were considered scraps in the 1960s, far from the party food they would become years later. Mothers browned them in a skillet, sprinkled flour to build a roux, and poured in water or broth until it thickened into a gravy that could stretch across a full pot of rice. The wings cooked low and slow, soaking up the gravy until they were soft, flavorful, and irresistible. The whole dish tasted like comfort, the kind that made you sit a little longer at the table just to savor the warmth. Children loved smothered wings because they felt rich even when they were not. Mothers loved them because they fed everyone without emptying their pockets. The gravy was always the real star, thick, savory, and perfect for spooning over everything on the plate. Leftovers rarely survived until the next day because kids asked for more before the pot even cooled. Smothered chicken wings were the kind of meal that made a house feel full even when the budget was not. Fried haddock with tartar sauce was the Friday night ritual that made the end of the week feel special even when money was tight. Families bought haddock because it was affordable, mild, and easy to cook, the kind of fish even picky kids would eat without a fight. The fillets were dusted with flour or dipped in a simple batter, then lowered gently into hot oil where they crisped into a golden, flaky piece of comfort. The sound of frying filled the kitchen with the promise of something warm and satisfying. Tartar sauce, usually made from mayonnaise and chopped pickles, added a creamy tang that made the whole plate taste like a restaurant meal without the cost of going out. Kids loved how the crust crackled when they bit into it. Adults loved how reliable and filling it was after a long week. Sometimes it came with a side of coleslaw or potatoes, but the fish was always the star. The meal felt like a small celebration, a tiny break from the routine, something that said you made it through another week. Even now, people crave that simple plate because it carried a sense of comfort, tradition, and the steady rhythm of family life. Fried haddock dinners tasted like warmth, togetherness, and the peaceful feeling of a Friday evening that asked nothing more of you. Collard green stems and onion stir-fry was the result of a kitchen rule every Black mother knew. Nothing gets wasted. While the leaves went into the main pot, the stems were chopped thinly and cooked with onions and seasoning until tender mothers sautéed them in fat saved from pork or chicken, letting the stems soak in all the leftover flavor. The onions caramelized slightly, giving the dish a sweetness that balanced the natural bite of the stems over rice. The mixture became a complete meal, filling enough to keep the whole family satisfied. Kids sometimes mistook the dish for something new, surprised that the parts usually thrown away could taste so good. It was frugality transformed into creativity. Collard green stems and onion stir-fry was a reminder that survival meant knowing how to use every last inch of what you had. Homemade fish cakes were the ocean's gift to frugal kitchens and clever cooks. Canned salmon, mackerel, or even tuna became something special when mixed with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and egg. The mixture was formed into patties, pressed firm between flour-dusted palms, and dropped into hot oil where they hissed and crackled. The smell filled the kitchen with a salty promise, the kind that made you feel rich no matter what the bank said. Each patty fried to a perfect golden brown, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of potatoes, They were a complete meal, cheap, filling, and full of pride. The secret was in the seasoning, often passed down from memory. A pinch of salt, a touch of mustard, maybe a shake of pepper. They were proof that good food came from care, not cost. Every bite was a reminder that a clever cook could make the simplest pantry taste like a banquet. Fried cabbage and potatoes was the smell of thrift and warmth rolled into one. The sizzle of sliced potatoes hitting the skillet mingled with the sound of cabbage crackling as it softened. It was a poor man's stir-fry, made with nothing fancy but full of flavor. Sometimes bacon grease or a strip of fatback turned the whole thing smoky, rich, and satisfying. The meal came together fast, just a handful of ingredients, but it fed everyone around the table. Children knew this dinner meant it was almost payday, when everything left in the pantry came together for one last meal. It was humble food, but every bite was seasoned with care. What made it special was not what it cost, but the way it could make a home feel full again, even when the shelves were bare. The pan clattered, the scent rose, and people gathered close without being called. The potatoes browned to perfection, the cabbage wilted into silk, and suddenly poverty felt far away. The laughter that filled the room tasted better than any feast. Fried cabbage and potatoes might not have been much to look at, but it carried dignity in every bite. It turned scraps into satisfaction and made sure no one went to bed hungry. Boiled potatoes with butter and parsley were the definition of humble comfort, a meal that carried both simplicity and grace. They showed up on tables during lean times when money was scarce, yet hearts were full. Potatoes were scrubbed clean, quartered, and dropped into a pot of salted water to boil until tender enough for a fork to slide through. When drained, they glistened with steam, waiting for that golden touch of butter to melt across their surface. The parsley, freshly chopped or dried from the pantry, wasn't just garnish. It was a gesture of care, a bit of color that made the meal feel special. Some families poured a splash of milk into the pot for creaminess, others browned the butter for deeper flavor. No matter how it was done, the result was the same, a dish that satisfied both hunger and heart. The smell alone could quiet a noisy house, reminding everyone that even the plainest ingredients could feel like home. Boiled potatoes with butter and parsley weren't extravagant, but they were proof that comfort could be found in the simplest acts of cooking, where love was the main ingredient. Vegetable plate night was a tradition born from necessity, but remembered for how comforting it felt. Meat was expensive, so mothers filled the table with multiple vegetable dishes instead. Sweet potatoes, okra, beans, greens, cabbage, or whatever could be grown, bought cheaply or shared by neighbors. Each dish was simple on its own, but together they formed a full, colorful plate. Kids enjoyed picking from different bowls, building their own combinations like it was a special occasion. The textures ranged from creamy to crispy, the flavors layered with seasoning that masked how inexpensive the ingredients were. With cornbread on the side, the meal was filling, warm, and satisfying. Mothers often made this dinner at the end of the week, using whatever was left in the kitchen, turning scraps into something everyone looked forward to. Neighbors sometimes exchanged small bowls, making the meal feel even more communal. Kids loved the freedom of choosing their favorites, stacking their plates high without a single complaint. Vegetable plate night showed that a dinner did not need meat to feel abundant. It was community, creativity, and care served up in small bowls across the table. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Chicken rice bake with mushroom soup was the definition of a 1960s casserole, the kind of oven dish that tasted like pure warmth. Families mixed rice, bits of chicken, and canned mushroom soup into a single pan, letting it bake until everything softened into one creamy, savory blend. The rice absorbed the soup, the chicken added richness, and the whole dish came out bubbling and fragrant. It was easy, dependable, and perfect for nights when the goal was to feed many with little. Kids loved the creaminess, adults loved the simplicity, and everyone loved how the leftovers tasted even better the next day. It was not fancy, but it was comforting in a way no restaurant meal could match. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like being taken care of. Pinto beans with salt pork were one of the most dependable weekday dinners because dried beans cost almost nothing and could fill a pot big enough to feed everyone for days. Mothers poured the beans into a bowl the night before and let them soak, softening them just enough so they would cook evenly. In the morning, the beans were rinsed, the pot was filled, and a small piece of salt pork was tucked in for flavor. It was rarely more than a square of fat with a bit of meat clinging to it, but that little piece carried the whole dish. As the beans simmered, the house filled with a savory, comforting smell that made children stop whatever they were doing and stand near the stove. Mothers stirred the pot slowly, checking the beans until they softened into that creamy, perfect texture. Paired with cornbread or rice, it became a complete dinner. Some families ate this for 2 or 3 nights in a row, each bowl tasting better after sitting overnight. Mothers knew how to adjust the pot with simple seasonings, making the most humble meal feel warm and steady. Pinto beans with salt pork were simple, humble, and deeply loved, the food that made families feel full even when money was scarce. Creamed peas on toast was the quiet triumph of the thrifty kitchen, where love turned scarcity into satisfaction. When meat ran out, mothers reached for canned peas, butter, and a little flour to make magic happen. The butter melted into the pan, bubbling with the promise of warmth, and a spoonful of flour thickened it into a creamy roux. A splash of milk turned everything smooth and velvety, coating each green pea in a blanket of comfort. The toast, simple white bread browned on a pan or in the oven, waited like a canvas for the sauce to spill across it. The smell was gentle, buttery, and sweet, the kind that made a house feel like home. It was a meal made in minutes but remembered for years. Families sat together at small tables, passing plates with gratitude and quiet joy. It was humble, yes, but never empty. It fed both hunger and hope. Creamed peas on toast was more than a supper. It was a reminder that gentleness in cooking could make even the hardest days feel soft again. Gizzards and gravy over rice was a dish that took patience, not money. Gizzards were the kind of meat most folks overlooked, tough and chewy unless cooked just right. But when simmered for hours in seasoned broth, they softened into something delicious. The gravy was thick, poured hot over rice that caught every drop. It was soul food in the truest sense, made from scraps and turned into satisfaction. Every kitchen had its secret way of making it right, from adding peppers to browning the flour just so. You did not need fine ingredients, only faith that it would come together. The smell alone made neighbors knock, asking for a taste. It was a poor man's delicacy and a proud cook's triumph. Homemade vegetable pot pie was the story of thrift wrapped in a crust, the kind of dinner that made ordinary ingredients feel like a celebration. Leftover vegetables, peas, corn, carrots, potatoes, were gathered into a pot, mixed with thickened broth and butter to form a creamy filling. The crust was rolled by hand, patched if needed, and laid lovingly across the top before being brushed with milk for shine. As it baked, the scent of pastry and herbs filled the home, wrapping the room in comfort. When the knife cut through that golden crust, steam rose like a sigh, carrying the fragrance of care. Every bite was soft, savory, and familiar. the essence of home-cooked love. It was a meal that stretched what little you had into something that felt complete, something that made the family sit closer and linger longer. Vegetable pot pie was more than sustenance. It was the art of making do, elevated to something tender and unforgettable. Smothered pork neck bones over rice were the kind of dinner that filled a home with slow-built comfort long before anyone sat down at the table. Pork neck bones were among the cheapest pieces you could buy, but they held more flavor than most people expected. Mothers browned them deeply in a heavy skillet, scraping up every bit of seasoning stuck to the bottom before adding onions, garlic, and water to create a rich gravy. The pot simmered for hours, bubbling quietly while the meat softened and released its flavor into the broth. Kids wandered through the kitchen pretending they were not checking on dinner, but everyone knew the smell alone could pull you from any room in the house. When the gravy thickened just right, mothers poured it over big bowls of rice, letting the grains soak in every drop. The neck bones were tender enough to slip from the bone, the gravy warm and savory, the rice filling and grounding. No one cared that the dish was made from scraps or cheap cuts. Smothered pork neck bones over rice tasted like love stretched across a tight budget, a warm promise that everyone would eat well that night. Okra fritters with corn silk were the kind of kitchen magic that only came from necessity and imagination. In the long summer months, when the fields were full and money was not, people used every part of what they harvested. The corn silk that clung to the ears was not thrown away, but saved and shredded, added into batter alongside chopped okra, flour, and a splash of milk or water. When dropped into hot oil, the fritters puffed and crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp. The smell was something you could follow from down the road. Warm, nutty, and sweet with that faint scent of corn. Each bite was crunchy on the outside and tender in the middle, with little strings of corn silk that gave it texture and charm. They were served with syrup or vinegar, depending on what the family had, eaten right out of the pan when patience ran out. Okra fritters with corn silk were food born from care and cleverness, proof that waste had no place in a humble kitchen. Every family had its own version, passed quietly between generations, carrying the taste of late afternoons, hard work, and simple joy. They were poverty's poetry, fried into something worth remembering. Brown gravy meatballs with breadcrumb filler were one of the most creative ways mothers stretched a pound of meat. They mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs, onions, eggs, and seasoning, shaping the mixture into small meatballs that browned quickly in a skillet. Sometimes mothers added chopped peppers or leftover rice to stretch the mixture even further. A simple brown gravy was made from drippings, flour, and water, turning the dish into something warm and comforting. The meatballs simmered in the gravy until tender, soaking up flavor. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, the meal felt hearty and rich. Even though most of the volume came from the breadcrumbs, kids loved the soft texture and the savory gravy. The dish filled the air with a warm, familiar scent that promised fullness and calm at the end of a long day. Brown gravy meatballs were a masterclass in stretching ingredients with dignity. Shepherd's pie with leftover roast was the definition of reinvention, a masterpiece of thrift and comfort. Yesterday's scraps of meat were chopped fine, mixed with whatever vegetables had survived the week, and bound together with a splash of gravy. Sometimes a bit of leftover bread or oats thickened the filling, soaking up every ounce of flavor. On top went a layer of mashed potatoes, spread smooth with the back of a spoon, then dragged into peaks that browned beautifully in the oven. The smell was a blanket of warmth that wrapped the whole house. It was the kind of meal that could silence a room once served, everyone too busy savoring to speak. Families didn't need a lot to make it right, they just needed care and a cast iron dish. It was food that turned hard times into shared joy and scarcity into something that tasted abundant. Shepherd's pie was proof that love didn't show itself in grand gestures. It showed up in leftovers turned into miracles. Homemade pinto bean soup was a meal that proved patience was a cook's greatest wealth. Beans soaked overnight and simmered all day, filling the house with warmth and the scent of promise. Onions, salt, and a bit of leftover fat were enough to make it rich. It stretched far, one pot for dinner, the rest reheated for lunch. A family could live off it for days, spooning out bowls that tasted better each time. It was more than soup. It was a rhythm of survival, where every meal meant another day endured. Families learned to trust the slow simmer, to let time do the work that money could not. The bubbling pot told its own story, one of endurance and quiet pride. Sometimes there would be cornbread on the side, sometimes just a spoon and faith. It fed bodies and spirits alike, reminding everyone that a little patience could turn almost nothing into something beautiful. Cabbage rolls with ground beef and rice were a triumph of patience, skill, and unshakable hope. One head of cabbage, softened in boiling water, became the vessel for a hearty mix of rice, meat, onions, and spice. Each leaf was filled carefully, folded tight like a promise, and laid in neat rows inside a pot. Tomato sauce was poured over the top, bubbling slowly until everything came together in harmony. The scent alone could feed a soul before the first bite even touched a plate. Every roll told a story of care. A mother's hands working late into the evening, her eyes soft with purpose. The rolls were tender, flavorful, and filling, feeding large families on little more than a pound of meat. Eaten with bread to soak up the sauce, it was a dinner that made the ordinary feel special. Cabbage rolls were patience served hot, a lesson that time and love could make even the simplest food unforgettable. Hoover stew was the meal that kept families fed when the pantry looked bare and the paychecks had stopped. It was a pot of survival, bubbling with whatever a family could gather, usually macaroni, canned tomatoes, and slices of hot dog that stretched further than anyone thought possible. Every house had its own version, passed along like a secret recipe of endurance. Sometimes it was soupy, sometimes thick enough to stand a spoon in, but always hearty. Mothers would stir the pot with tired hands, humming gospel songs as the smell of tomato and salt filled the room. The macaroni swelled, the hot dogs bobbed like little treasures, and children waited with bowls clutched tight. It was the taste of making do, of not giving up when cupboards were empty and spirits low. Hoover stew was more than a meal. It was proof that a little imagination could turn struggle into supper, and that warmth came as much from hope as it did from heat. Canned greens with salt pork were a lesson in turning dull into delicious. The greens came from tins stacked on grocery shelves, limp and pale until they met the pan. But when cooked low and slow with a piece of salt pork, they came alive again, rich with smoke and soul. The smell filled the house long before the meal was ready, earthy and familiar, like Sunday cooking on a weekday. A pot of greens was never just food. It was memory, family, and tradition simmering together. Even in the 1970s, when canned vegetables were cheap and fresh produce was hard to come by, people knew how to make them taste like something special. The salt pork melted down into flavor, wrapping every leaf in warmth. You did not need fancy spices, just time and patience. It was the kind of meal that made neighbors knock on the door, asking what was cooking. Served with cornbread or rice, it could feed a family and still leave leftovers for tomorrow. It reminded people that nothing from the garden or the pig ever went to waste. Poor folks knew how to season survival with skill, turning plain food into something that fed more than hunger. It fed the spirit, too. Cabbage and noodles, Haluski style, was an immigrant gift that became a Depression-era staple across working-class homes. The ingredients were humble: shredded cabbage sautéed in butter or lard, mixed with soft egg noodles and seasoned with salt and pepper. Sometimes onions or bits of bacon were added if the budget allowed, but even without extras, the dish was satisfying in every way. It was sweet, savory, and filling, food that hugged the stomach and soothed the soul. Families of Eastern European roots brought it to steel towns and mining camps, and soon neighbors of every background adopted it. The smell of butter-browned cabbage filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, a scent that felt like comfort itself. This dish carried stories of endurance and migration, of women who made plenty out of scarcity and shared it freely. Haluski wasn't glamorous. It was grounding. It reminded everyone that simple ingredients, treated with care, could taste like love. Pan-fried gizzards were the kind of meal that proved patience was as important as any spice. Tough and chewy at first, these scraps of poultry were transformed through slow cleaning, seasoning, and frying into golden bites of pride. A bowl of seasoned flour, a splash of buttermilk, and a hot cast-iron skillet were all it took to turn what most people ignored into something worth gathering for. The gizzards hissed in oil until they were crisp on the outside and tender within, each one carrying the smoky taste of hard work and heart. Families would pile them high on paper towels, watching the steam rise like a promise that dinner was ready. Every batch felt earned, every crunch a reminder that flavor came from care, not wealth. Children gnawed at the edges, soaking the last bits in hot sauce, while elders nodded in approval. Pan-fried gizzards were food that spoke of resourcefulness, a celebration of making something special from nothing. They filled kitchens with the sound of sizzling survival, the scent of seasoning that lingered long after the plates were empty. In every bite was proof that thrift could taste like triumph. Fried bologna sandwiches were the working family's delicacy, simple yet unforgettable. A slice of bologna hit the skillet with a pop, curling up at the edges as it browned. Some folks cut a small X in the center to keep it flat, while others let it bubble proudly in the middle. The smell was savory, smoky, and enough to draw kids from every corner of the house. Served between two slices of white bread with mustard or mayonnaise, it became a warm, satisfying meal. It was the kind of sandwich you could make in minutes after a long day, but it tasted like something far more special. In neighborhoods across the South and city blocks up north, this quick bite became a comfort food that never really left. It was proof that nostalgia could be fried right into a pan and served up with pride. Many added cheese when payday came or a fried egg for extra richness, but even plain, it hit the spot every time. The first bite was always hot and salty, the bread soft and buttery at the edges. It was cheap, sure, but it tasted like victory at the end of a long week. That sizzle in the pan sounded like hope, fast, familiar, and enough to make a whole family smile. Rice and gravy plates were the kind of dinner that proved a single pan of drippings could be stretched into something that tasted far richer than it cost. After frying chicken or pork, mothers saved every drop of fat left in the skillet, scraping up the brown bits stuck to the bottom. They sprinkled a little flour into the pan, stirring slowly until it turned the right shade of brown, then added water or broth to build the gravy. Onions went in if the family had any, softening down until they melted into the sauce. Meanwhile, a pot of rice bubbled on the stove, its steam fogging up the windows on cold evenings. When everything was done, mothers spooned the gravy over big mounds of rice, letting it soak through every grain until the plate was heavy, warm, and comforting. Children loved how the gravy seeped to the edges, turning simple rice into something that felt complete. It was a meal built from scraps, but it never tasted that way. Rice and gravy plates were the quiet heroes of weeknight dinners, turning leftovers into nourishment. Egg and potato hash was the meal that turned yesterday's scraps into tonight's feast. It began with leftover boiled or roasted potatoes, chopped into rough cubes and tossed into a skillet slick with grease or butter. The potatoes browned at the edges, crisping beautifully while onions caramelized beside them, adding sweetness and aroma. Then came the eggs, cracked right into the pan, sizzling as they set and pulling everything together. Sometimes, a splash of milk or a handful of cheese found its way in, but even plain, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd. The smell of fried onions and eggs filled the air, waking appetites and hearts alike. Families didn't need meat when they had this. It was rich, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. Each forkful carried warmth, care, and the quiet ingenuity of cooks who refused to waste a thing. Egg and potato hash wasn't just a dish, it was a philosophy. It whispered, "Make do, be proud, feed your own." It proved that even the simplest food, made with love, could taste like triumph. Liver and onions was the kind of meal that tested your resolve before rewarding your patience. The smell filled the kitchen long before dinner was ready, and not everyone liked it. But when money was tight, taste had to take a back seat to nourishment. Thin slices of liver, dredged in flour, hit the pan with a sharp hiss. followed by the sweet perfume of onions caramelizing low and slow. It was a dish packed with iron, one that kept workers strong through long days. Mothers would tell their children, "Eat up. It will put strength in your bones." And they meant it. It was not a luxury meal, but it was medicine in disguise. The bitterness faded as the onions sweetened, turning hardship into something almost pleasant. By the end, plates were wiped clean because waste was not an option. This was food that reminded families that survival always came first, and pride could taste better than comfort. The frying pan became a teacher of patience, sizzling with rhythm and purpose. Families learned that love sometimes wore the scent of onions and the taste of endurance. Even those who disliked liver remembered the care behind it. The scraping of the skillet, the quiet stirring, the sigh of a mother watching her family eat. It was a meal that told a story of strength in silence, proving that even bitter food could leave behind a sweet memory. Sweet pea and potato casserole was one of those gentle, unassuming dishes that fed families through tight budgets and busy lives. It came together from pantry staples: canned peas, diced potatoes, a bit of cream or broth, and whatever seasoning happened to be nearby. Once baked, it softened into a creamy, comforting dish that tasted like warmth itself. It was not bold, not spicy, not dramatic, but it did not need to be. It was the kind of food that sat quietly on the table, filling plates and stomachs without fanfare. Kids often pushed peas around their plates only to realize, bite by bite, that the casserole actually tasted pretty good. Adults appreciated that it stretched ingredients far enough to feed everyone while still feeling whole. It tasted like a memory of soft kitchen light and evenings that moved slowly. Even now, there is something deeply soothing about the simplicity of peas and potatoes baked together, reminding people that comfort does not need to be complicated. Fried mackerel fillets were the fish dinner families depended on when fresh fish was too expensive, but canned or inexpensive mackerel could still be bought. Mothers seasoned the fillets lightly, dipped them in cornmeal, and fried them until the edges crisped and the center stayed flaky. Sometimes they added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce if they had it, but even plain, the fish was flavorful enough to satisfy hungry children. The sizzling sound from the skillet made every child drift into the kitchen. Served with rice or bread, the fillets stretched surprisingly far. Mothers often cooked extra rice just to make sure the fish fed everyone, and somehow it always did. They smelled salty and rich, like a small celebration, even on an ordinary night. Kids ate them with big smiles, enjoying how the crisp coating cracked under their teeth. Fried mackerel fillets were the taste of the ocean made affordable through skill, not money. Potato soup with onions and milk was the meal that could fix almost anything. When the cupboards were nearly bare and payday was still far away, this humble soup stood like a quiet hero. A few potatoes, an onion, and a bit of milk were all it took to fill stomachs and calm worries. The smell of onions sizzling in butter or bacon grease drifted through the kitchen, wrapping the room in comfort. Potatoes were peeled and chopped, dropped into a bubbling pot of water, and left to soften until the broth turned cloudy and fragrant. A splash of milk turned it silky, while salt and pepper gave it life. Some added a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Others tossed in a scrap of leftover ham or a pat of butter for richness. It was simple, cheap, and perfect, made not to impress, but to sustain. Grandparents called it poor man's cream soup, yet no one felt poor eating it. It was warm, filling, and tasted like kindness itself. Around the table, spoons clinked against bowls, laughter echoed between bites, and for a moment, the world outside felt manageable. Potato soup was more than food. It was faith in a pot, made from little but meaning everything. Fried cornmeal mush was a meal that stuck to your ribs and your memories. Made from cornmeal, water, and salt, it was poured into a pan, cooled, then fried into golden slabs that crisped on the outside and stayed soft in the middle. It was a Depression-era recipe that refused to die, a cheap staple that carried over into the 1970s because it worked. Kids ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, sometimes with syrup, sometimes plain. The sound of it sizzling in a skillet was the soundtrack of 1,000 kitchens. It was food that made do without apology. In a world that measured worth by what you had, fried cornmeal mush was the quiet reminder that even the simplest meal could feel rich. People learned that comfort came from creativity, not cost. Creamed corn and biscuit supper was a simple, pantry-based dinner that mothers relied on when grocery money was at its lowest. Canned corn was mixed with milk, flour, butter, and seasoning until it thickened into a creamy, sweet, comforting base. Meanwhile, biscuits baked in the oven, their edges browning just enough to promise a warm, tender center. The combination was filling, familiar, and deeply soothing. Kids broke their biscuits open and scooped big spoonfuls of the creamed corn inside, making little sandwiches that dripped with warmth. Every bite tasted like home, even though the meal came from the most basic ingredients. Mothers often prepared this meal when there was no meat left at all, turning simple staples into something that felt complete. The smell of biscuits baking made the whole house feel calmer, softer, and safer. Even adults looked forward to this humble pairing because it brought back memories of earlier years. Creamed corn and biscuit suppers were proof that thrift did not mean giving up comfort. Corn chowder with salt pork was the golden comfort of the lean years, rich in spirit if not in ingredients. Sweet corn, fresh when possible, canned when not, was simmered with diced potatoes, onions, and bits of salt pork that gave it a smoky depth. The pork fried first, popping and sizzling as its fat rendered out before milk was poured in to create a thick, creamy base. The chowder simmered slow, its scent wrapping the house in buttery warmth. Each spoonful was hearty, sweet, and full of quiet reassurance. It was food that didn't try to impress. It simply made you feel safe, full, and grateful. The dish stretched easily, feeding big families with little cost, and it always tasted like home. Served with crackers or crusty bread, it filled empty stomachs and soothed weary hearts. Corn chowder wasn't about indulgence. It was about care, patience, and knowing that love was the secret ingredient all along. Turkey necks and gravy were the kind of meal that started from scraps and ended like a feast. Bought cheap at the butcher, these bony cuts looked like nothing special, but a few hours in a pot proved otherwise. The meat fell from the bone, tender and rich, and the broth turned silky with flavor. A roux turned it into thick gravy poured over rice or mashed potatoes, stretching the meal to fill every plate. The scent of it cooking could make a house feel alive again. This was not just dinner, it was survival served with soul. The lesson was simple. With time and patience, even the cheapest meat could turn into a meal worth remembering. The bubbling pot filled the air with warmth, calling everyone home before the sun went down. Kids would peek in the kitchen, eyes wide, waiting for the first ladleful. When the meal was finally served, it felt like Sunday dinner, even if it was a Tuesday night. Every bite was tender, heavy with flavor, and lighter on the wallet than anyone could believe. It was proof that comfort did not need wealth, it only needed care. Baked ham with pineapple rings was the kind of sweet, savory centerpiece that made Sundays feel like holidays, even when nothing special was happening. Families would take a modest cut of ham, stud it with cloves, and layer pineapple rings on top, letting the juice drip down the sides as it baked until the whole kitchen smelled warm and sticky. The ham itself was simple and affordable, but the pineapple transformed it, turning an ordinary meal into something festive and bright. Watching the fruit caramelize in the oven felt like watching a tradition unfold, one that had been passed through so many hands that it no longer belonged to anyone in particular. Kids loved the sweetness, adults loved the nostalgia, and everyone loved the way the table suddenly felt fuller with that ham sitting in the center. Slices were served thick or thin, usually with mashed potatoes or bread on the side, soaking up all the extra glaze. Even now, people remember that taste because it felt like an occasion, something that meant family was gathered and everything was calm. It was a dish that stretched across decades, bringing people back to simpler times every time it reappeared. Pinto bean cakes were genius in their simplicity. Leftover beans from last night's pot were mashed, mixed with flour and onions, and fried until golden brown. What had started as scraps became something new, something delicious. The cakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the center, hearty enough to stand on their own or to sit beside rice or greens. It was a meal made by hands that refused to waste, by people who understood that nothing in the kitchen should ever be thrown away. The scent of frying bean cakes was homely and warm, a small reward for hard work. Each bite tasted of thrift, resourcefulness, and quiet pride. It was proof that survival could be creative, and that good cooking never depended on wealth, only wisdom. The sound of the pan crackling was the sound of resilience itself. A sprinkle of salt, a turn of the spatula, and the world felt right again. Served with hot sauce or ketchup, they turned into a feast from the plainest of ingredients. Bean cakes taught children early on that waste was not an option, and that love could be fried up right alongside supper. Red gravy rice bowls were the kind of quick, filling meal mothers made on nights when time and money were both running thin. Red gravy was not the fancy kind found in restaurants, but a simple tomato-based sauce cooked with onions, seasoning, and whatever bits of leftover fat or meat were available. It simmered until the onions softened and the flavors blended into something far more satisfying than its ingredients suggested. Some mothers added a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, while others stirred in a spoonful of flour to thicken it just enough to cling to the rice. The pot bubbled gently on the stove, sending out a warm smell that wrapped the house in comfort long before dinner was served. Mothers spooned it generously over fresh rice, letting the sauce seep into every grain. Children dug in eagerly, blowing on each bite because they never waited long enough for it to cool. They loved how the rice soaked up the sauce, turning a handful of cheap staples into something that tasted whole. It was cheap, warm, and grounding in a way only comfort food can be. Red gravy rice bowls tasted like resilience, the kind families depended on. Rice and gravy supper was simplicity perfected, the kind of dinner that proved luxury had nothing to do with money. A pot of soft, steaming rice sat waiting while the skillet worked its magic. The gravy began with drippings, saved from fried chicken, pork chops, or even a Sunday roast, scraped and stirred with a wooden spoon until the bits lifted and melted into flavor. Flour and water followed, thickening it just enough to coat the back of a spoon, and then came the pepper, plenty of it. When that golden brown gravy was ladled over rice, it turned humble grains into something rich and deeply comforting. Families gathered around the table, their worries melting away with every bite. It was food that filled more than bellies. It filled the soul with calm. Even without meat, it carried the taste of patience and love, proof that a single pan and a few ingredients could build a feast. Cabbage and smoked neck bones filled the air with a smoky sweetness that said dinner was near. Every southern kitchen knew that smell, the kind that wrapped itself around the walls and made people hungry just walking by. The cabbage boiled down soft, soaking up every bit of salt and smoke from the neck bones. It was simple food that turned into a feast when paired with cornbread or rice. In the 1970s, this was survival cooking at its finest. One pot, one stove, one meal to feed a whole family. You did not need much money, just time and patience. The meat was cheap, but the taste felt like Sunday. It was humble, honest food that brought people together. Kids would hover over the pot, waiting for that moment when the lid lifted and the steam hit the air. The dish carried more than flavor. It carried memory, the kind that sticks to your ribs and your heart. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, warm or fried, were the quiet heroes of tight budget nights when families needed something filling, sweet, and comforting. Bananas were mashed or sliced, spread across bread with a thick layer of peanut butter that stuck to the roof of your mouth in the best possible way. Sometimes the sandwich was served cold, simple, and soft. Other nights it was placed in a skillet with a bit of butter and fried until the bread turned golden and the filling melted into a warm, gooey mixture that tasted almost like dessert. The smell of toasted bread and sweet banana drifted through the house, reminding everyone that a good meal did not have to be complicated. Kids devoured these sandwiches without realizing they were eating one of the most budget-friendly dinners imaginable. Adults appreciated how quickly they came together on nights when energy was low and money was stretched thin. Even now, people crave that comforting blend of nutty, creamy sweetness because it tastes like childhood kindness, like the soft end of a long day, like something made with care during tougher times. It was simple, warm, and unforgettable. Churn milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churn milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. Molasses-glazed ham hock plates were built around a single inexpensive hock that flavored an entire pot. Ham hocks were meaty enough to give greens, beans, or vegetables a deep, smoky richness, but cheap enough for families on tight budgets. Mothers simmered the hock slowly, letting its flavor seep into everything in the pot. Sometimes onions, carrots, or potatoes were added, turning the dish into a complete meal. A drizzle of molasses added sweetness that cut through the salt, creating a glaze that coated the meat and vegetables. Children waited eagerly for their serving, sometimes hoping to get the piece of meat, but always satisfied with the vegetables soaked in its flavor. The dish filled the home with a holiday-like aroma even on ordinary days. It was the kind of meal that felt festive even when money was low. Molasses-glazed ham hock plates were holiday flavor made every day affordable. Chicken and dumplings from scratch were the crown jewel of kitchen wisdom, the kind of meal that stretched one bird into something grand. The chicken simmered slow in a big pot of water, bones and all, until the broth turned cloudy with richness. Onions, celery, and carrots added depth, transforming the air into a promise of warmth. Then came the dumplings, rolled thin or dropped by spoon, depending on family tradition. They puffed and floated in the bubbling broth, tender and soft as memories themselves. The kitchen filled with steam and quiet anticipation as the meal came together. Every bowl was an act of love, hearty enough to chase away hunger and weariness alike. Leftovers were rare, but when they existed, they tasted even better the next day. This dish wasn't just food, it was connection, the kind that bound families through hard years and cold winters. Chicken and dumplings taught that patience and care could turn scarcity into abundance, and every bite carried that lesson forward. Sweet potatoes and white bread supper was simple, sweet, and sacred in its own way. When sugar was scarce, this pairing filled the gap between dinner and dessert. Sweet potatoes were roasted or boiled until soft and mashed, then spread across slices of white bread still warm from the toaster. Sometimes a bit of butter or syrup was added, if luck or paychecks allowed. The flavor was rich but humble, sweet enough to satisfy and hearty enough to last through the night. It was the kind of meal that carried memories of holidays and home, even on the hardest days. Families sat around small tables, sharing what little they had, and somehow it always felt like plenty. It was a quiet joy, born from making sweetness out of struggle, a reminder that love could turn even two simple foods into comfort. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes would drift through the house, thick and warm like a promise. Some ate it slowly, savoring every bite, while others devoured it like it was cake. There was no shame in it, just satisfaction. That humble meal was more than food. It was proof that something as ordinary as a potato and bread could taste like care, and sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive. Fish sticks and crinkle-cut fries were the kind of dinner kids begged for, the unofficial meal of busy weeknights when the adults were too tired to fuss. The moment that frozen box hit the counter, excitement followed, because everyone knew dinner would be fast and crispy, and exactly the kind of food children believed counted as a celebration. The fish sticks went into the oven in neat rows, sizzling as the breading crisped while the fries baked beside them, each crinkle catching just enough salt to make them addictive. It was not fancy seafood, not even close, but to a child it tasted like the best thing the freezer aisle had ever made. There was comfort in the uniformity, the predictability, the way dipping sauces always turned the plate into a tiny adventure. Adults liked it because it filled everyone up without much effort. Kids loved it because it tasted like freedom and fun. Even now, biting into a fish stick can take you straight back to a living room floor covered in toys, a television playing too loudly, and a plate balanced on your knees. It was cheap, easy, and unforgettable. Neck bone stew was the kind of food that demanded patience and rewarded love. Pork neck bones were cheap, meaty enough to flavor a pot, and rich enough to make even plain vegetables taste like a feast. Families would buy a handful from the butcher and let them simmer all afternoon with onions, celery, and carrots until the meat fell off the bone. The broth grew thick and smoky, the kind that clung to spoons and hearts alike. For many, this was the meal that marked Sundays, when everyone crowded into the kitchen, laughing and talking over the bubbling pot. It was not fancy, but it was full of pride. Neck bone stew turned hard times into comfort and hunger into gratitude. The smell alone could bring neighbors knocking, eager for a bowl. In every tender bite was the story of people who knew how to make flavor from scraps and strength from struggle. Cornbread and Potlikker supper was the kind of meal that grew out of nothing but still felt like everything. Potlikker, the broth left behind after cooking greens, was never thrown away in a black kitchen. It was liquid gold, full of nutrients and flavored with whatever seasoning or scraps of pork simmered with the greens. Mothers poured it into bowls or skillets, added hot cornbread right from the pan, and let it soak until the bread softened around the edges. Children loved breaking the cornbread into pieces, mixing it into the warm Potlikker until it became thick, almost like a stew. It tasted deeply savory and rich, far more filling than anyone expected from what was technically a leftover. Some nights this meal was eaten quietly, everyone savoring the warmth after long days. Other nights it became a shared moment, kids dipping their cornbread at the same time just to see who soaked up the most. Cornbread and Potlikker supper was survival wrapped in tradition, a reminder that nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste. Cornbread and beans was the supper of survivors, the backbone of countless working families who knew how to turn little into plenty. The beans simmered low and slow, soaking up every bit of flavor from scraps of onion, bacon, or a precious ham bone saved from Sunday dinner. The longer they cooked, the richer they became, filling the home with a deep, savory scent that promised satisfaction. Cornbread baked nearby, its golden crust rising in the oven, the smell of butter and cornmeal mixing perfectly with the aroma of beans on the stove. When dinner was ready, families gathered close, crumbling the cornbread right into their bowls to soak up the thick broth. It wasn't just filling, it was fulfilling, warming both the body and the spirit. Some families added vinegar, others sprinkled sugar, but every household had its way of making it just right. Cornbread and beans told a story of endurance and community, of hard hands and full hearts. It wasn't luxury, it was life, steady and sustaining, passed from one generation to the next as a lesson in gratitude and grace. It reminded everyone that love, like good beans, only grows stronger the longer it's tended. Beef and vegetable skillet hash was the solution to vegetables on their last day and bits of leftover meat waiting for a purpose. Everything went into the pan together, sizzling and browning until the kitchen smelled like something hearty and homey. The vegetables softened, the beef crisped around the edges, and the whole skillet turned into a savory patchwork of flavors. It was filling, flexible, and comforting, the kind of meal shaped entirely by what needed to be used up. Kids might pick through it, adults might appreciate it more, but everyone remembered it. Even now, people crave that skillet hash because it tasted like practicality done right, like the quiet work of making food last without sacrificing comfort. It was a dish that reflected the real rhythm of family life, a meal that came from instinct instead of recipes. You could hear the spatula scraping the pan and know dinner was close, Know something warm and honest was about to land on your plate. It was thrift elevated by experience, and that is why it still lives in so many memories. Black-eyed peas with cornbread was a meal built on tradition, luck, and endurance. These tiny beans were cheap but mighty, packed with protein and comfort. Simmered with bits of onion, fatback, or ham bone, they turned into something far richer than their humble ingredients suggested. The cornbread, golden and crisp at the edges, was perfect for soaking up the flavorful juices at the bottom of the bowl. It was the taste of the South, earthy, smoky, and deeply rooted in memory. Families made it at the start of a new year for good fortune, but for many, it was a year-round staple. No matter the day, black-eyed peas and cornbread meant there was still food, still hope, still a table worth gathering around. The pot would bubble for hours, filling homes with the smell of comfort and continuity. Each bowl carried the lessons of generations, of patience, of faith, and of gratitude for what the earth gave. Even when times were thin, this simple combination could make a family feel rich. Eating it was never just about hunger. It was a quiet promise that tomorrow would bring enough. Chicken backs and necks gumbo was the kind of dish that came from deep knowledge, the kind mothers inherited from generations who knew how to stretch poultry scraps into something extraordinary. Backs and necks were the cheapest parts of the bird, often sold for pennies. Mothers browned them, added a dark roux, and slowly layered in vegetables like celery, onions, and bell pepper. The gumbo simmered for hours, building flavor until the whole house smelled like Sunday even on a weekday. Sometimes a leftover bone or a tiny bit of sausage went in, just to deepen the broth served over rice. It became a feast built from scraps. Children never realized how inexpensive it was. They only knew how good it tasted. It warmed the belly, lifted the spirit, and made even the leanest pantry feel full. Chicken backs and necks gumbo was survival turned into heritage. Homemade meatloaf with oats was a true invention of necessity, a dish that turned resourcefulness into ritual. Families who couldn't afford much still managed to create something that felt rich and filling. Ground beef was stretched with rolled oats or crushed crackers, onions, and eggs, ingredients that added texture, flavor, and volume. The mixture was packed into a loaf pan, brushed with ketchup or tomato paste, and baked slowly until it browned at the edges and filled the home with the smell of comfort. The top caramelized beautifully, forming a sticky, sweet glaze that everyone fought to get a slice of. Each serving was dense but tender, hearty without being heavy. Served with mashed potatoes or bread, it made a full meal out of the humblest ingredients. Families passed recipes down through generations, tweaking the spices or sauces, but never losing the spirit of the dish. Meatloaf wasn't just dinner. It was the story of survival baked into form. It reminded people that even in lean times, love could still taste like abundance. That kind of faith turned poverty into pride. The aroma was enough to lift spirits, drifting through screen doors and down front porches. Even the pot itself told stories, passed from grandmother to mother, always filled with the same promise: luck, love, and full bellies. Some swore by eating it on New Year's Day, others made it whenever life felt uncertain. Either way, it reminded folks that good fortune could be cooked right on the stove, one slow stir at a time. For many, the dish became a ritual of renewal, the kind that turned one meal into a memory that never faded. Children who grew up on it would make it for their own families years later, repeating every step the same way their mothers did. The simple act of stirring a pot became a connection to generations past, a quiet thank you to those who survived on faith and beans. Cream chip potatoes were a full dinner disguised as a side dish, something families made when the pantry was nearly empty, but the expectation of a warm meal still stood. Potatoes were sliced, boiled until just soft, then folded into a simple cream sauce that turned everything silky and comforting. It was not flashy or colorful, but it was filling, warm, and dependable. The sauce coated every piece, turning the dish into a milky, tender scoop of pure comfort that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Families served it on its own or with a biscuit or two, letting the potatoes carry the whole meal. Kids often underestimated it until they took a bite, only to realize how satisfying it was. Adults relied on it because it stretched ingredients beautifully. Even today, the memory of those creamy potatoes lingers because it was the kind of food that kept people going with nothing more than simplicity and care. Liver and onions was the meal that divided the table. Some loved it, others only learned to. Still, it was a staple for families who knew the value of nourishment over preference. Liver was cheap, packed with iron, and one of the few meats available when rationing made everything else scarce. Mothers dredged the slices in flour, dropped them into sizzling pans, and topped them with sweet caramelized onions to soften the flavor. The scent was sharp and earthy, but it meant dinner was near. Children might scrunch their noses, but their parents knew this meal kept them strong. Liver and onions was not a luxury. It was resilience on a plate. It taught people that food could heal, even when it did not delight. And somehow, between the onion's sweetness and the liver's strength, the bitterness of hard times always faded by the last bite. Families passed down their own small tricks, soaking the liver in milk, adding a splash of vinegar or a touch of sugar to the onions. Each variation told a story of trying to make hardship taste a little softer. The clinking of forks and quiet hum of appreciation at the table made it clear that this meal, plain as it was, fed more than just bodies. It fed endurance. Neckbone stew with potatoes was the kind of dinner that proved Black mothers in the 1960s could turn almost nothing into something that fed both the body and the spirit. Neckbones were one of the cheapest cuts in the store, thrown into the bargain bin because no one with extra money wanted them. But mothers knew better. They scrubbed the bones clean, set them in a deep pot, and covered them with water until the kitchen filled with the slow rising scent of broth. Potatoes were added later, cut into big chunks so they could soak up every bit of the flavor. The stew simmered for hours, bubbling gently while children drifted in and out of the kitchen, hungry long before dinner was ready. By the time the pot was done, the neck bones were tender, the potatoes were soft, and the broth was rich in a way only time could create. Mothers ladled it into bowls with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had stretched scraps into a full meal for an entire family. It tasted like warmth, patience, and the kind of love that works behind the scenes. Neckbone stew with potatoes was survival food made beautiful through care. Cabbage and sausage skillet was the kind of dinner that turned struggle into satisfaction. A single head of cabbage, cheap and sturdy, could feed a whole family when paired with a few slices of sausage or hot dogs. Grandmothers fried the sausage first, letting the grease flavor the pan, then tossed in ribbons of cabbage that sizzled and softened. The sound of it frying was enough to make mouths water, a tune of thrift and triumph. The smell filled the house, smoky, savory, and sweet all at once. Potatoes or onions sometimes joined the mix, stretching it further while adding depth. Served hot from the skillet, it was hearty and humble, with each bite carrying flavor far greater than its cost. This meal didn't come from plenty, it came from wisdom, from knowing how to make something out of nearly nothing. Families ate together, full and grateful, proving that good food didn't need much, only love, heat, and a little time. Pig's feet stew was one of those meals that made a house smell alive. The pot simmered for hours, slow and steady, turning tough meat into something soft enough to fall from the bone. With onions, garlic, and a few sprigs of greens, the broth thickened into something hearty enough to stretch across 2 or 3 nights. No one wasted anything, not even the bones, because that stew carried everything a family could afford, and sometimes more. It was made on Sundays, or when the weather turned cold, the kind of dish that drew neighbors to the porch asking what was cooking. The feet themselves were cheap, sold in bundles for less than $1, but the patience to make them tender took skill. This was food for people who had more time than money, and more faith than both. The slow bubbling, the steam on the window, and the laughter that followed each bowl told the story of survival done with grace. Chicken and rice soup with saltines was the gentle dinner families turned to when someone was sick, tired, or simply needed a bowl of something soothing. The broth simmered with small bits of chicken, soft rice, celery, and carrots until everything blended into a warm, mild mixture that felt healing in every spoonful. Kids crumbled saltines over the top, watching them soften into the broth while adding just enough salt to wake up the flavor. The soup filled the house with a soft, comforting smell that signaled everyone to slow down. It was not a fancy meal, but it was one that carried emotional weight, something parents made with quiet intention. On cold nights, it warmed you from the inside out. On stressful days, it felt like a reset button. Even now, the memory of that simple soup can bring back the feeling of being wrapped in a blanket with the television humming softly in the background. It was the taste of gentleness, patience, and the kind of love that shows up in small, steady ways. Boiled cabbage and salted fish was a meal that spoke of coastlines and hard work. Salted fish, preserved to last through rationing, was soaked and boiled until tender, its salt mellowed but its flavor strong. The cabbage cooked alongside, soaking up the richness of the fish while releasing its own sweetness. The smell was unmistakable, the kind that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Some served it with rice or cornbread to stretch it further. It was humble, yes, but satisfying. A reminder of how deeply the sea and land fed one another. Even far from the coast, families held on to this dish, a piece of history served steaming in a single pot. It carried the spirit of fishermen, mothers, and laborers who worked with what the earth and ocean allowed. The salt clung to the air like a memory of the sea, even for those who had never seen it. This was food that told stories of storms survived, of nets mended, of tables where gratitude was the main course. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, a flavor that outlasted hardship and traveled through generations untouched. Canned salmon croquettes were one of the most beloved budget dinners because they turned a cheap can of fish into something that felt almost fancy. Mothers mixed the salmon with onions, cornmeal or breadcrumbs, eggs, and simple seasonings, shaping the mixture into patties. When they hit the hot skillet, the croquettes sizzled loudly, signaling that dinner would be crisp and golden. The outside browned beautifully, while the inside stayed soft and savory. Sometimes mothers squeezed in a bit of lemon or added chopped peppers when they had extra ingredients, elevating the dish even further. Served with rice, potatoes, or plain bread, the croquettes stretched one can far enough to feed several children. The smell drifted through the house, making everyone hungry long before the meal was served. Kids especially loved the way the crispy coating gave way to the tender filling. Canned salmon croquettes were frugality turned into celebration. Fried rice with leftover meat bits was a meal built from instinct, a masterpiece of thrift and flavor. Cold rice, saved from yesterday's dinner, met the heat of a skillet slick with oil or bacon grease. Diced onions, carrots, and scraps of ham or sausage joined the mix, sizzling until everything caramelized. The rice crisped around the edges, soaking up every bit of fat and flavor. A splash of soy sauce or dash of salt tied it all together, though each cook added their own twist, maybe a pinch of pepper or a beaten egg stirred in at the end. It was a meal that tasted like care and resourcefulness, a way of saying nothing here will be wasted. Families loved it because it was quick, cheap, and endlessly adaptable. Fried rice was proof that cooking wasn't about what you had, it was about what you could make of it. Boiled potatoes with canned meat was the kind of dinner that taught people how to survive on imagination alone. It did not matter whether the can said Spam, Vienna sausages, or potted meat, whatever was on sale or left on the shelf was enough. Potatoes were boiled soft until they nearly fell apart, then mashed together with slices of salty meat that glistened in the pan. The smell was simple but comforting, a mix of salt and starch that spoke of home. The dish filled bellies fast, which was all that mattered when money was low and appetites were big. Some added onions or a bit of grease to give it life. Others poured the leftover liquid from the can into the pot for flavor. Every version was different, but every version told the same story, making the best out of the least. Families gathered around chipped plates, grateful for something warm after a long day. The sizzle of meat hitting the pan was a small victory against hunger. Children did not care where it came from. It was dinner, it was hot, and it was theirs. Those canned goods were the quiet heroes of the kitchen, turning a bare pantry into a meal that tasted like endurance. Poverty might have taken choices, but it never took pride, and nothing proved that better than a pot of boiled potatoes and canned meat cooked with heart. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes was a surprisingly tangy, humble dish that stretched every ingredient just a little further, making it a popular staple in the 1960s kitchen. Elbow macaroni boiled until tender was mixed with tomatoes stewed down until they turned soft and slightly sweet, creating a flavor that was simple yet strangely satisfying. It did not pretend to be anything fancy. It was a dish for busy parents, hungry kids, and anyone needing comfort without cost. The tang from the tomatoes mixed with the soft macaroni in a way that stuck in your memory long after childhood passed. Some families topped it with a bit of cheese, some kept it plain, but either way, it tasted warm and familiar, like a weeknight that ended well. It was a dish defined not by extravagance but by reliability, something people still crave because it feels like stepping back into a kitchen where everything was steady and safe. Collard greens with ham hocks was a dinner that filled the whole house with warmth long before the plates were set. Collards were cheap and grew in nearly every backyard garden, but when simmered with a ham hock, they turned from ordinary greens into something soulful. The pot bubbled for hours, spreading the smoky smell of cured meat through small kitchens and open windows. People joked that you could smell it halfway down the block, and they were right. The liquid, known lovingly as Potlikker, was prized just as much as the greens themselves, rich, salty, and full of nutrients. Some soaked it up with cornbread, others drank it straight. Collards with ham hocks were not just food, they were fellowship. They told a story of roots, community, and patience, showing that even hardship could taste like home when cooked with care and faith. Tomato okra rice stew, sometimes called country stew, was a dish built from the garden and the pantry, relying on vegetables and rice instead of meat. Mothers combined canned tomatoes, fresh or frozen okra, onions, and seasonings in a large pot, letting everything soften into a thick, spoonable stew. A little garlic or hot pepper was added when available, giving the pot a gentle heat that made it even more satisfying. Rice was added to stretch the meal, swelling as it absorbed the tomato broth. The mixture simmered for a long time, sending up warm, familiar scents that wrapped the house in comfort. Children gathered near the stove, lifting the lid even when told not to, eager to see the bubbling stew. Kids loved its bright flavor and soft texture, especially when paired with cornbread. They learned early that vegetables could stand on their own when seasoned with care. It was a filling dinner made from the most basic ingredients, yet it never felt lacking. Tomato okra rice stew was proof that even plant-based meals could feel rich. Cornbread and buttermilk was the simplest supper there was, but it carried the most meaning. On hot southern nights, folks would crumble leftover cornbread into a glass or bowl, pour cold buttermilk over it, and eat it with a spoon. No stove, no fuss, just comfort. It was cooling, filling, and deeply tied to home. This dish was about making do with what was left, turning yesterday's bread into tonight's meal. It was humble, but it was also history. A reminder that even in hardship, people found ways to sit down and share a moment of peace. The tang of the buttermilk mixed with the sweetness of the cornbread, creating a flavor that was both sharp and soothing. Old folks swore it could fix almost anything: a tired body, a hungry stomach, or a heavy heart. It was the taste of endurance and gratitude, simple as it was sacred. Hot dogs and pork and beans were the kind of quick dinner families relied on when nights were too busy for anything else. The beans simmered until they thickened, turning sweet and smoky, while sliced hot dogs added enough salt and substance to make the whole meal feel complete. It was simple, cheap, and surprisingly satisfying, the kind of dinner kids hurried toward when they heard the can opener turning. It tasted like television nights, homework half done, and the comfortable chaos of family life. Even now, people crave it because it brings back a feeling of uncomplicated joy. The flavor was familiar and predictable in the best way. A warm little bowl that asked nothing of you except to sit down and enjoy it. Parents liked that it came together in minutes, and kids liked that it felt like a treat, even though it was one of the easiest meals in the house. It was a dish woven into weeknights, routines, and the small moments that ended long days with something warm and steady. Turnip greens and rice were food for the weary but nourishment for the strong. The greens, bitter on their own, mellowed into flavor when boiled down with a little fat or bone. The rice soaked up everything, turning the dish into something both filling and healing. It was simple, yes, but it carried the essence of home, steam, spice, and the rhythm of spoons against bowls. Sometimes families added bits of salt pork or even a splash of vinegar to wake up the taste. Most times, though, it was just greens and rice, humble and whole. It fed everyone, from the field hand to the school child, giving strength for another day. In kitchens lit by single bulbs and hope, this meal was not just eaten. It was shared, savored, and remembered. The steam rose from the pot like a prayer, curling in the air as laughter filled the room. It was a dish that brought silence to hunger and calm to the hardest of hearts. Turnip greens and rice were proof that nourishment did not need luxury, just patience, warmth, and a steady hand to stir the pot. Crispy fried bologna steaks were the kind of meal black children in the 1960s grew up begging for, even though the ingredients cost next to nothing. Mothers cut the bologna thicker than usual, scoring the edges so the slices would not curl too much in the heat. As soon as the meat hit the skillet, it sizzled loudly, releasing a smell that made every child's stomach growl. Some mothers fried onions in the same pan, letting the sweetness mix with the salty meat. The edges crisped up perfectly, turning golden and just a little chewy. Served on soft white bread or with a side of rice, the meal felt like more than the sum of its parts. Kids loved watching the slice puff and tighten in the pan before collapsing back into shape. Mothers loved how quick, cheap, and dependable the dish was. Fried bologna steaks were simple, but they tasted like a treat made just for the children who crowded around the stove. Goulash with elbow macaroni was the working family's secret to stretching a little into a lot. A single pot could feed everyone, bringing together canned tomatoes, noodles, and bits of ground beef or sausage in a dance of flavor and practicality. The sauce thickened as it cooked, coating every curve of macaroni in tangy, savory richness. The bubbling sound was as familiar as laughter, filling the kitchen with life. It was food for long days when the world felt heavy, but the promise of dinner made it lighter. Some added a dash of hot sauce or a spoon of sugar. Every cook had their own rhythm. No two pots of goulash ever tasted exactly the same, but they all carried the same message. You are cared for. Served with bread or nothing at all, it was the meal that proved comfort didn't come from wealth, but from togetherness. Goulash was the smell of home, the flavor of love dressed in tomato and noodles. Macaroni with evaporated milk was the humble cousin of mac and cheese, made without luxury, but with all the heart. Families mixed boiled pasta with a can of milk, a pinch of salt, and maybe a bit of butter if they could spare it. It thickened into a creamy dish that looked rich even when it was not. Some stirred in black pepper or dried herbs to make it special. It was a dish made to stretch, to fill bellies without breaking budgets. Children never cared that it lacked real cheese. To them, it was just good. For parents, it was a reminder that love could turn even a bare pantry into something that tasted like comfort. In small kitchens, mothers stirred the pot with quiet pride, knowing they were making something that would last until payday. The smell was gentle but comforting, warm like a promise that hunger would have to wait. The sound of spoons clinking in metal bowls was its own kind of music. Families gathered close, sharing laughter over a meal that cost next to nothing but meant everything. It was proof that simplicity could still taste like home, that love could flavor even the plainest food. Ham and scalloped potatoes were a creamy, layered casserole that made the entire kitchen smell warm and welcoming. Thin slices of potatoes were stacked with bits of ham and covered in a simple cream sauce before baking until everything turned soft and bubbling. The top browned into a golden crust that gave way to tender layers beneath. Families loved it because it stretched a small amount of ham into a full dinner, something that mattered in households watching their budgets closely. Kids loved the creamy texture. Adults loved the practicality. And the dish itself became a quiet favorite on many dinner tables. Even now, people crave that simple, rich casserole because it tasted like winter nights, steady routines, and the joy of dipping a spoon into something warm after a long day. Hominy pancakes were another clever way families stretched resources into filling meals. Hominy, boiled corn kernels treated with lye, was folded into simple flour batter and fried on a hot griddle until crisp on the edges. The result was a pancake that was hearty, chewy, and rich in flavor. Families leaned on this dish because hominy was inexpensive, filling, and often available in bulk. These pancakes were served plain or topped with syrup, molasses, or even just butter when sugar was scarce. Children enjoyed the slightly nutty texture, while adults appreciated that it carried them through long hours of work. Hominy pancakes were tied to heritage too, with roots reaching back to Native American food traditions that influenced Southern cooking. They were a reminder of resilience and cultural continuity, showing how simple staples could be reinvented to meet new needs. Hominy pancakes filled stomachs, but they also filled mornings with the comfort of tradition and the creativity of making do. Kidney bean chili stretchers were a budget version of chili that relied heavily on beans and only a small handful of beef. Mothers browned just enough meat to add flavor, then added onions, canned tomatoes, and kidney beans, letting everything simmer into a thick stew. The beans softened and absorbed the seasoning, creating a dish that tasted rich despite its simplicity. Chili powder or pepper gave the pot warmth, turning the meal into comfort food that stretched across several days. Served over rice or with cornbread, it filled stomachs quickly. Kids loved how hearty it felt, never noticing how little meat was actually in the pot. The pot often stayed on the stove for multiple meals, each reheating, deepening the flavor. Mothers loved that it fed everyone without stress, making a single can of beans go much further than expected. It was the kind of meal that stretched time as much as ingredients. Kidney bean chili stretchers were survival disguised as celebration. Peanut butter soup was one of those Depression-era wonders that made little feel like plenty. Families took what they had, a jar of peanut butter, a splash of milk, and a spoon of sugar, and turned it into something warm, filling, and full of life. The peanut butter melted into the milk, thickening into a creamy base that was sweet, nutty, and oddly comforting. Some cooks added a pinch of salt, others stirred in oats or mashed bananas to make it stretch further, and every version carried the same homemade goodness. It wasn't fancy, but it stuck to the ribs and warmed the soul. Children loved its sweetness. Parents loved its practicality. Served in chipped bowls or poured over toast, it filled bellies and lifted spirits during days when food was scarce and hope ran thin. Its smell, roasted peanuts and sugar warming over the stove, was the scent of creativity and care. Peanut butter soup was more than just survival food. It was love disguised as invention, proof that kindness could live even in the leanest kitchens. Fried hot dogs and rice were the clever man's version of sausage and grains, a dish born straight from necessity. One pack of hot dogs could stretch across 3 or 4 dinners if you sliced them right. Fried in a skillet until golden and crisp at the edges, the pieces were tossed into fluffy white rice seasoned with whatever was around: salt, pepper, maybe a touch of hot sauce. The sound of the skillet was quick and cheerful, the kind of noise that made a small kitchen feel like a celebration. It was cheap, filling, and came together in minutes after long workdays. Kids loved it because it looked fun, and parents loved it because it filled everyone without breaking the budget. Leftovers were rare because no one ever left a bite behind. It was proof that even the simplest food could still feel like comfort. Fried hot dogs and rice may not have been fancy, but in its sizzling, smoky way, it gave families a taste of joy on the hardest nights. Breaded veal patties were once a diner favorite that found steady homes in 1960s kitchens, served with gravy and mashed potatoes like something straight off a lunch counter menu. Families bought them because they were inexpensive, easy to cook, and tasted tender once fried and covered in gravy. The breading gave them a crisp exterior, while the inside stayed soft and mild, making them a hit with children who had not yet learned to love stronger flavors. The dish felt comforting, reliable, and just hearty enough to end a long day right. Even though they appear less often today, many people still crave that nostalgic taste because it reminds them of childhood dinners served hot on plates that clattered slightly when set on the table. There was something reassuring about the whole routine, from hearing the sizzle of the patties in the pan to watching the gravy bubble as it thickened. It was a kind of dinner that did not require fuss or stress, only a warm pan, a steady hand, and the quiet instinct of someone who cooked from memory instead of recipes. Those veal patties were proof that simple food could feel like a feast when shared at a table filled with familiar voices and everyday conversation. Cowpea soup simmered like a prayer whispered over a fire. The pot would start with water, a scoop of dried field peas, and maybe a scrap of salted meat if the week had been kind. Onions and garlic joined in, releasing their scent as the broth thickened into something golden and strong. The cowpeas, small and sturdy, softened slowly, their flavor deepening with every hour. This wasn't fast food, it was patient food, built on rhythm and time. Families made it during harvest, when work was hard and hands needed warmth. It was ladled into tin bowls and passed around without ceremony, each bite grounding you in gratitude. Sometimes cornbread floated on top like an offering, soaking up the last drops of broth. The soup tasted of earth and labor, of simple things done well. Cowpea soup was both meal and memory, tying together generations who had learned how to make plenty out of little. It was food for body and spirit alike, humble but whole, strong but soothing. Even now, its scent carries the same promise, that comfort comes from what you give, not what you have. Stewed chicken gizzards were one of the most economical meals mothers turned to when they needed something hearty but inexpensive. Gizzards were sold in small bags for almost nothing. Tough at first, but full of flavor when given time, mothers cleaned them thoroughly, then simmered them with onions, celery, and broth until they softened into tender bites. The stew thickened slowly, filling the air with rich aromas that signaled dinner was near. Sometimes mothers added a little flour to make a thicker gravy, perfect for spooning over rice or mashed potatoes. Children often stared curiously at the gizzards, unsure at first, but one taste of the silky gravy and tender meat changed minds quickly. The dish was warming, comforting, and surprisingly filling. Stewed chicken gizzards turned one of the most overlooked cuts into a bowl of nourishment that kept families steady through long weeks. Spam and fried potatoes were the meal of working families who knew how to make the best of what they had. The can hissed open with a promise of salt and survival, the pink slices laid into a skillet where they browned and curled at the edges. The smell was unmistakable, savory, smoky, and satisfying. Potatoes followed, diced and fried in the leftover grease until golden and crisp, soaking up every ounce of flavor. The result was a plate that felt both hearty and homely, feeding everyone without fuss or waste. It was food that asked for nothing fancy, just a frying pan, a bit of oil, and the will to make it work. For many, it was the taste of wartime resilience and post-war routine, a dish that stayed on tables long after ration books were gone. Spam and potatoes were proof that love didn't need luxury. It just needed warmth, effort, and the shared joy of a hot meal after a long day. Rice and tomato stew was what happened when creativity met scarcity. Canned tomatoes were cheap, rice was filling, and together they made something magical. The pot bubbled with tangy sweetness and the aroma of onions, garlic, and pepper. Some added a dash of sugar, others hot sauce or greens, but the heart of the dish stayed the same, simple, affordable, and satisfying. It was dinner for anyone who needed a reminder that warmth could come from the simplest ingredients. Each spoonful told a story of resourcefulness, of families who knew how to make flavor out of struggle. The red sauce clung to the grains, thick enough to feed a table full of hungry mouths. It was a dish that taught patience and gratitude, stirring slowly as the day wound down. Kids waited by the stove, drawn by the smell of tomatoes and home. Even when money was low, that pot brought people together. Every bite carried comfort, a reminder that even the poorest table could still hold pride. Corned beef hash with a fried egg was the kind of hearty skillet meal families leaned on when they needed something filling that cooked fast. Corned beef crisped in the pan alongside diced potatoes, onions, and peppers until everything browned together in a savory, sizzling mixture. Then came the fried egg, placed on top with a soft, golden center that spilled gently into the hash with the first cut of a fork. The smell filled the house, earthy and rich, waking up appetites instantly. Kids liked mixing the egg into the potatoes, turning the whole plate into a warm, comforting mess. Adults liked how far a single can of corned beef could stretch. It was practical, reliable, and deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that kept everyone full and content. Even now, people crave that combination of crispy edges, soft potatoes, and rich egg because it tasted like weekend mornings, family chatter, and the simple goodness of skillet cooking. Canned mackerel croquettes were the ocean's answer to tight budgets. A can of mackerel, a handful of breadcrumbs, and some chopped onion turned into golden patties fried crisp in a pan. They were fish cakes for people who could not afford fresh catch but still wanted flavor and protein. The smell of frying mackerel filled the kitchen, sharp but familiar, the kind of scent that let the whole block know supper was on. Served with rice or white bread, they made a complete meal. Leftovers were rare, but when they happened, they were tucked into sandwiches for lunch the next day. It was humble food, but with every crunch came a sense of pride. Poor families made it work, turning canned fish into something that tasted like success. It was not about luxury, it was about love and knowing how to make a dollar stretch as far as a meal could go. The sizzling oil, the golden crust, the careful flip of the spatula, it all felt like ceremony. Kids stood by, waiting for their turn, eyes following every move. Even when times were rough, the sound of frying croquettes promised that life could still taste good. Hot water cornbread and collard greens were the Southern anthem of resilience. Cornmeal mixed with boiling water, stirred thick, and patted into cakes before hitting the hot grease, sizzling like applause. The crust turned golden and crisp, the inside soft and steaming. In another pot, collard greens simmered for hours with onions, a dash of vinegar, and the smoky whisper of salt pork or ham hock. The two dishes belonged together, one soaking up the juices of the other, both telling stories of survival. This was food born from the earth, from hands that planted and harvested, cooked and endured. The smell of greens filled the home with warmth and history, reminding families that struggle and celebration often shared the same table. Every bite carried a balance of bitterness and comfort, a harmony only time could create. Hot water cornbread and collard greens weren't just Southern staples. They were living traditions, proof that faith and flavor could rise from even the hardest soil. Black-eyed peas and stewed tomatoes were an inexpensive pairing that offered both protein and comfort. The peas were simmered first, softening in a pot of water with onions or a scrap of fat for extra flavor. As they cooked, the broth turned creamy and earthy, creating a base that tasted rich even without meat. Stewed tomatoes were added near the end, bringing acidity and sweetness that balanced the earthiness of the peas. Mothers often seasoned it with pepper or garlic powder to deepen the flavor. The mixture was spooned over rice or eaten with cornbread, filling the stomach in a way that felt grounding and complete. Kids liked the bright color and the mild, comforting taste. The dish was warm, reliable, and deeply nourishing. It was a simple meal, but never a disappointing one. Black-eyed peas and stewed tomatoes were survival food with soul. Chicken pot pie, whether frozen from the store or made from scratch at home, felt like a small luxury in the 1960s kitchen. The golden crust, flaky and warm, opened up to a creamy filling of chicken, peas, and carrots that tasted far richer than its price. Kids treated it like a special treat, watching steam rise as the crust cracked open. Parents appreciated that it fed everyone without requiring much work, especially on colder evenings. It was a dish that felt celebratory even on ordinary days. And for many, that bubbling filling remains one of the strongest edible memories from childhood. The smell alone made the house feel cozier, like the walls were holding in a little more warmth than usual. Families often gathered around the table a bit faster when pot pie was involved, eager for that first spoonful that blended soft vegetables with tender chicken. Even now, one bite can bring back entire scenes from the past, the kind lit by soft kitchen lights and the hum of a quiet night settling in. Fried cornbread, sometimes called hot water bread, was the quick fix when flour ran low and hunger ran high. A handful of cornmeal, a pinch of salt, and a splash of boiling water. That was all it took. The batter hit the skillet with a hiss, puffing up into golden patties that crackled at the edges. Crisp outside and tender inside, they were eaten with greens, beans, or just on their own. It was the kind of bread that came together fast and filled every stomach around the table. Folks joked that hot water bread was born out of stubbornness because no shortage could stop people from making something warm to eat. It was humble, yes, but it held pride, flavor, and the kind of history that keeps families strong even when times are lean. The sound of it frying filled the room with life, and the smell carried straight to the porch. Children would watch, waiting for the first piece to cool, their mouths watering. Some cooks added a touch of bacon grease for richness, others fried them plain, relying on the corn's sweetness alone. Each patty was a small victory, a promise that even the simplest meal could feel whole when shared with love. Chicken feet soup was a frugal dish that offered surprising nourishment. Chicken feet were inexpensive because most people overlooked them, but mothers in the 1960s knew they held deep flavor and gelatin. After cleaning them carefully, mothers simmered the feet with onions, celery, carrots, and seasoning until the broth became rich and silky. Sometimes a bay leaf or clove of garlic was added when available, creating a broth that tasted far more luxurious than its cost suggested. The feet released their collagen into the soup, giving it a thickness that warmed the body from the inside out. Bits of vegetables broke down, adding more substance to the pot. Served with rice or bread, it became a filling meal for a large family. Children might have eyed the chicken feet with curiosity, but once they tasted the broth, they understood why the dish was cherished. The richness of the soup made everyone feel full and cared for. Chicken feet soup turned the least expensive parts into nourishment. Vegetable soup from kitchen scraps was pure genius born from necessity, a pot of everything and nothing all at once. Every peel, every end, every leftover carrot, potato, or onion found its way into the bubbling broth. Grandparents saved the bones from roasts, the wilted greens from salads, even a handful of noodles if there were some left behind. Those scraps met in the pot and became something far greater than the sum of their parts. The broth deepened in color and flavor with every passing hour, carrying the scent of care through the house. It was food that took time, that demanded patience, that rewarded frugality with comfort. The wooden spoon stirred slowly, pulling stories from the pot like memories rising with the steam. Kids waited, bowls in hand, as the kitchen fogged with warmth. Each bite tasted like love stretched thin but never broken. Nothing was wasted. Not time, not flavor, not effort. It was a reminder that even small things, when treated with respect, could become something beautiful. Vegetable soup was a testament to endurance, to gratitude, and to the art of making enough out of almost nothing. Fried bologna and onions was the kind of meal that reminded people that flavor could come from almost nothing. A single slice of bologna, fried until the edges curled like a flower, filled the whole kitchen with that familiar salty smell. It sizzled in the old pan beside thin slices of onion that softened and turned golden, sweetening as they cooked. Some people laid it on white bread, others on biscuits, and a few ate it plain with mustard. It was the taste of a long day's work, the hum of conversation, and laughter over chipped plates. The bologna might have been cheap, but the pride behind that frying pan was not. Families made this after the paycheck ran out, after rent was paid, when the fridge was nearly empty but spirits stayed high. It was food for the tired, the hopeful, and the proud, people who refused to let hunger take away their joy. Kids grew up thinking the smell of frying bologna meant love, because in a way, it did. That sizzling sound meant dinner was ready, no matter how little there was to cook. Spam and fried potatoes was the sort of meal that turned thrift into something craveable. Spam cubes hit the skillet with a hiss, browning into salty, crispy little bites that tasted far richer than their priced potatoes sliced thin and cooked alongside them soaked up every bit of flavor, turning golden at the edges and soft in the center. It was a skillet meal that came together fast, fed everyone well, and filled the house with a smell that was impossible to forget. Families made it because it was easy, cheap, and satisfying, but they kept making it because it tasted like home. The combination of textures, the crackle of the potatoes, and the deep, savory bite of the spam all worked together better than anyone expected. Kids saw it as a treat, adults saw it as practical, and everyone saw it as a kind of magic born from a can and a pan. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like childhood, like simpler times, and like pure comfort. Neckbone stew was a dish that came from both poverty and genius. In kitchens that owned more will than wealth, neck bones were slow simmered until the meat slipped right off and blended with the broth like silk. The smell alone carried across yards, filling homes with warmth that no coin could buy. It was a stew that turned waste into nourishment, where each bone told a story of patience and pride. Families often cooked it on weekends when they had a little time and a lot of mouths to feed. A few onions, a pinch of salt, and maybe a carrot or two if luck allowed. Nothing fancy, yet everything that mattered. The magic was in the time it took, not the price of the ingredients. Children grew up waiting for that bubbling pot, knowing it meant everyone would eat well that night. The first spoonful always felt like a reward, the kind that only hard work and faith could earn. Neckbone stew was more than a meal. It was a symbol of how far resourcefulness could stretch. It was living proof that love could turn even the humblest scrap into a feast worth remembering. Okra and tomato skillet dinners were a celebration of what could be grown, canned, or shared when grocery money was scarce. Okra came from backyard gardens or neighbors who always had extra to give. Canned tomatoes added brightness and acidity that turned the dish into something filling and hearty. Mothers seasoned it with onions, garlic, and pepper, letting the vegetables stew down until they became thick and deeply flavored. Sometimes a pinch of sugar or paprika went in, just to balance the tang or add warmth. The skillet hissed softly as everything cooked, filling the room with the smell of tomatoes and earth. Sometimes it was served over rice, sometimes with cornbread, and sometimes as the meal all on its own. Children learned early that vegetables could carry a dinner when meat was not part of the budget. They would scoop big spoonfuls onto their plates, pleased by how comforting and familiar it tasted. Okra and tomato skillet meals were proof that survival could still taste good. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were the pride of thrifty kitchens. Mothers would line up bright green peppers on the counter, slicing off the tops and scooping out the seeds with care. A single pound of ground meat, beef if you were lucky, or whatever was on sale, was stretched with rice, onions, and breadcrumbs until it could feed the whole family. The mixture was packed into each pepper, standing tall in a baking dish before being smothered in tomato sauce. As it baked, the scent filled the house with warmth, tangy and savory all at once. The peppers softened, the sauce thickened, and dinner became something that looked fancy even when it cost next to nothing. Families gathered around the table, cutting through the soft vegetables to reveal the hearty filling inside. It was a meal that brought pride, not pity, proof that resourcefulness could taste like celebration. Every bite carried the balance of thrift and love, where nothing went to waste and everything felt like home. Pinto beans and rice was the meal that never failed to show up when times were tight. It was dependable, like the neighbor who always waved or the church that never closed its doors. Pinto beans soaked overnight, then simmered slow with onions, garlic, and a bit of salt pork if you had it. Rice stretched it further, making one pot feed everyone at the table. The taste was earthy, hearty, and full of quiet strength. No one went hungry when there were beans on the stove. They were the rhythm of the week, the comfort of something warm after a long shift, the proof that cheap did not mean empty. Every spoonful carried history, from southern farms to city apartments, reminding folks that food can be both humble and holy. It was nourishment for the soul as much as the body, and it made even the poorest dinner feel like home. Baked chicken legs with paprika were the kind of simple oven meal every family seemed to know by heart. The chicken legs were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a heavy dusting of paprika that turned the skin a deep red as it baked. They cooked low and slow, filling the house with that unmistakable smell of roasted chicken that drifted through every room. The skin crisped just enough, the meat stayed juicy, and the seasoning tasted familiar and warm. Families served it with mashed potatoes, rice, or whatever vegetable was around that week, but the chicken always stole the show. It was inexpensive, reliable, and delicious, the kind of dish that never tried too hard but always delivered. Kids grabbed it with both hands, adults savored the flavor, and everybody ended up licking their fingers. Even now, people crave that paprika-dusted chicken because it tasted like family, like evening routines, like the kind of homemade meal that anchors a childhood. Watermelon rind hash was a dish that proved nothing in a southern kitchen ever truly went to waste. After the sweet red fruit was eaten down to its pale skin, the green rinds were peeled, diced, and saved for the next meal. They were boiled until soft, then tossed into a skillet with onions, peppers, and a pinch of spice. What came out of that pan was golden and glistening, sweet with a hint of salt, smelling faintly of summer rain and backyard laughter. The rind soaked up flavor like memory itself, turning something forgotten into something worth savoring. Families served it with cornbread or rice, sometimes even cold the next morning with eggs. It filled bellies when money was short and reminded everyone that resourcefulness could taste as good as plenty. The sizzle in the skillet sounded like hope, sharp and quick, the sign that something good was about to happen. Watermelon rind hash was not just food, it was gratitude on a plate. Every bite told the story of people who refused to waste even the smallest blessing. It was sweet, it was humble, and it carried the quiet genius of survival, transforming scraps into a celebration that no one ever forgot. Mustard greens with cornmeal dumplings were a full dinner in households where meat was too expensive to rely on. Greens were cheap, earthy, and sturdy enough to last through long cooking, but mothers knew they needed something extra to make them filling, so they mixed cornmeal with hot water, salt, and sometimes a little fat, shaping the mixture into soft dumplings that simmered right in the pot. As the greens cooked down, the dumplings absorbed the broth, swelling and thickening into something that stuck to the ribs. The house filled with a deep, savory aroma that signaled a warm supper was coming. Kids might not have realized how frugal the dish was, but they knew it tasted good and kept them full for hours. The greens were tender, the dumplings soft but hearty, and every bite felt grounding. Mustard greens with cornmeal dumplings were survival disguised as comfort, proof that simple foods could carry a family through a hard decade. Cornmeal mush with gravy was the taste of endurance that outlived the Depression and followed people right into the war years. It began with cornmeal whisked into boiling water, stirred until it thickened into a golden, bubbling paste. Left to set, it became firm enough to slice, fry, or drown in homemade gravy. The texture was soft and filling, the flavor humble but satisfying. For those with little money and big families, it was a meal that stretched as far as it needed to. Mothers would fry slices in bacon grease when they could, or serve it plain with onion gravy made from drippings. The smell of it cooking was a reminder that simplicity did not mean lack. It was food that carried people through, one spoonful at a time. Cornmeal mush was living proof that survival could be seasoned with creativity, that dignity could sit right beside thrift on a dinner plate. Cabbage and smoked sausage skillet was one of those frugal dinners that surprised people with how flavorful it was. Cabbage wilted down into soft, sweet ribbons while smoked sausage browned and released enough richness to season the whole pan together. They created a dish that was savory, smoky, and unexpectedly comforting. It filled the kitchen with steam and scent, warming the room as much as the meal warmed the stomach. Families made it because it was cheap, filling, and impossible to mess up. Kids might wrinkle their noses at the cabbage, but one bite usually changed their minds. Even now, that combination of smoky sausage and tender cabbage pulls people right back to their childhood kitchens, to nights when dinner was simple but perfect. and there was something deeply grounding about the way it all came together in one skillet, as if the ingredients knew how to support each other without much help. The dish tasted like a quiet evening, like soft conversations drifting across a small kitchen table, like the kind of comfort that comes from meals built on tradition and resourcefulness. Which African-American dinner deserves a place on your table again? Share your supper memories in the comments below, hit the like button, and subscribe so we can honor these forgotten recipes together.